Hello, this is Howie, and I'm here to help you win with money. I've been teaching finances for a long time to my friends and family. I did it at work for lunch and learns, and eventually converted that into a business, or more likely a side hustle, is what most of you call it. And I've been doing that for many years, and now I decided to put some of this stuff into videos and teach or talk about money topics. So today, I want to talk about the FIRE movement and what it is. Some people never heard of it. Some people may misunderstand it. Some people like it. Some people don't. So we're going to cover some of that. All right. So what is FIRE? Well, it's an acronym and it stands for Financial Independence and Retire Early. Some think that it dates back to this book called Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robbins and I believe it was Joe Dominguez. And there is this concept of FIRE is how do you get to the point where you can retire early or do what you want or do side gigging or work at Walmart as a door greeter, whatever it may be. There's a lot of different ideas of what it is. So it's generally has a really high saving rate from your income. And I use this concept of over 25%, but if you Google it, you're going to find a lot of families or people who are following this, they're closer to 40, 50, some are even in their 60s, and yes, there are some even higher than that. And so part of the FIRE movement is those who have a super high extreme saving rate. And the whole purpose of that is how do you get to retirement quicker? If you save 70 to 80%, you can get there in under 10 years. And so this concept of living frugally, right, and not always spending a lot of money, which means you may not buy new cars, you may not take fancy vacation that costs $5,000 or $10,000. Those are the choices you make, and there's nothing wrong with that. I actually love FIRE. In case those people who don't know, this is not a video against FIRE. I love the concept, and I'm always going to applaud people who can retire early. And another core teaching is their investing method is actually much simpler than other teachings. They're a big fan of, many of them are Vanguard fans, or they just believe in buying the S&P 500 or buying the total market index. So there are many different ways to do it, and they use this simple concept of if you get to 25 times your annual expenses, and if you use a 4% withdrawal rate, which is done by I believe it was a Trinity study back in the 70s. This is the concept behind, well, if your portfolio can generate enough money to cover your annual expenses, then that's the logic behind FIRE. Now, there are people who are against it, and before we do that, let's cover some of that. All right, here's one website. Susie Orman came out against it, and I even remember her saying, there's a whole article here, I'm not going to get into the details, but you can read some of this. They're talking about what's the difference if you accumulate $2 million portfolio, and her answer is, well, if you save a whole lifetime, right, and you hit 60 or 70, you do a traditional retirement, your money only needs to last, right, a shorter time, because your life expectancy between this age and the time of death could be 20 years, could be 25 years, maybe 30 years. But if you retire early, right, most people say, how do you keep your expenses low forever? And we'll talk into some of those details in this video as we cover it. Another person that's pretty famous that does not like it, you can see this, 5 reasons why Dave Ramsey's scared of FIRE. And here's that's Chris Hogan, who wrote the book Everyday Millionaire, which is similar to The Millionaire Next Door. But there is an official stance from the Dave Ramsey team, which is, yeah, we're not a big fan of it. And they go into, here's his baby steps. For those who don't know, you can read this on your own. You can find that on his website. And here's some of the differences. They worry about people are lazy. And I don't think this is true. Early retirees will actually go and do their passions. They travel. They do other stuff. There's This is an interesting one. His ELPs will lose out money, and then there's some other stuff. But you can read this stuff. And then the next one is, here's another article. Why does a movement have so many haters? This one also covers the Susie Orman thing here about why you need 5 million to retire early and not one or two, or if you're doing lean fire. But this article is well written. Again, Mr. Money Mustache is in here. There's some interesting points. It is true that if you retire early, it's hard to keep your annual expenses low. There are some in fire who try to live off of 20 or 30,000 or 40,000 a year, but not everybody does. And so there are some things that I want to talk about. But again, there's a lot of haters in this, and that's what I'm doing this video for. Let's switch back. Okay, and so there are different types of fire. Now, when we started, I don't remember. I don't even think there was a such thing as a lean and a fire or fat. But nowadays, there's so many different versions of this. So lean fire in general means you generally can live off of a smaller annual expense. And so, again, I'm not sure what the official line in the sand is, but if you're living under, let's say you use $20,000 to $40,000 a year, if you multiply that by 25, you can see that you need less than $1 million. So most people consider that lean fire. Fat fire was originally designed around people with higher incomes, your doctors, your lawyers, maybe even some of these IT workers who don't want to live on $20,000 or $30,000 a year. So fat fire, you can live off of $80,000 a year, right? So if you need 80,000 or more, or 100,000, you can see that you need a bigger portfolio using the 4% withdrawal rate. And there's different types of fire now, right? One where you can retire early, but maybe you do any useless job, sometimes either just for the healthcare benefits, or maybe you just need it to keep yourself busy, right? So there's that concept, using a part-time job. Coast fire is not a popular term, but it's almost like the concept of coasting, right? You're still going to have to work. So what it means is, let's say you're 25, you save a little bit of money for the next 10 years, and you hit, I don't know, $250,000, $500,000. What you can say is, okay, maybe I'm not going to do a full retirement, right? But I don't need to save anything else further. Because the money that I save, whether it's 100,000, $250,000, or $500,000, by the time I focus on a traditional retirement, that money will be big enough to sustain me for a normal retirement. So Coast Fire is a little bit different from this variation. Now, there are many in the fire movement who say, well, their goal is really not to retire. They retire from their day jobs, but they run blogs, they write books, they may do one-on-one coaching, they do mentoring, they do other stuff where they're still working and they're making money. And so we have to make sure we don't put all these people in one box and say fire is bad and this and that. I like fire. Again, I think, whether you're a Dave Ramsey fan or this person fan or Susie Orman, or I want to make sure we all understand, if you're winning with money, then we should be happy. The opposite of that is those who are losing with money. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you guys know plenty of your friends or even yourself. If you got $50,000 in credit card debt, that's losing. That's losing with money. Have you sat there and calculated how much interest you're paying a credit card company per month? It's in the hundreds. What about the car loan? Do you buy yourself a $40,000 car, take out a 6, 7, or 8 year car loan? You're losing 50 or $100 a month just on the interest in the beginning. And so that's losing money. And so people in this community need to support all the different methods of being financially independent. And not everybody uses the same method. And so this is the beauty about talking about all the different strategies. One of the most popular websites, Financial Samurai's one, Mr. Money Mustache has one. And really I want to talk about, well, what are your goals? Not everybody has the same goals, right? Some of your goals, what if you're a low wage earner, but you want a fat fire? How do you do it? That's going to be a little bit harder. If you're making, let's say, 30 or 40,000, but there's no way you're going to live off of, right? You don't want to retire and live off of 5,000 a year or 10,000. But what if you want to live off 100,000 a year? So you can see how something like that is a little bit more harder. The strategy is obviously you need to increase a little bit of your income, you save a little bit more. But these are things to think about. Not everybody needs to do a traditional fire. I think what I want to talk about today is more of a let's do it your way. Saving 5% is not enough. Even if you invest it, right? So you save 5% of your salary and you're investing in a 401k plan. That is just not enough. And I think this is what FIRE is so good at, is why do you want to work for 40 years or 50 years and then realize you never even get there? There's a big percentage of the population that just doesn't have enough money. So here's a article talking about that. The average 401k balance by age, income, gender, and industry. And here you can see the average balance is this, which is not a lot. Most FIRE people will pass that in 2 or 3 or 4 years. And so this is why we have to look at it. If you do a traditional investment method, right, which is I'm still in debt while I'm working and I save 2, 3, 4% of my salary, it's just not enough. And let's say you're even one of those who can manage to save 10% or maybe the magical 15% from the Dave Ramsey group. That's still not enough if you're in debt. And so these are the things that FIRE movement does really well, helping people say, hey, we can make it much further. And here are some of the numbers if you're interested. Here's the average balances. So what I like is most people in the FIRE movement will pass these average balances while they're in their 20s and 30s. I know I have, right? I had an average 401k balance that was much higher than even like something like this, right? Or even like this pretty early. So let's do the income level one. You see even these numbers are low. So this is based on your annual salary, this is the average 401k balance. And you can see what the problem is. Most people just don't save enough. And doesn't matter if you're using FIRE or anything else, traditional method, or you're using save while you spend method, live life for the now, you're just not saving enough. By gender, okay, you see it, there's a difference. Some of it may have to do with the pay difference. Some of it may have to do with how many years you're out of the workforce. Some of it may have to do with whatever it may be, right? There's a lot of other factors. And so we can see the data is showing it's just not enough, no matter how you slice it. By industry, average 401k balance, I'm not sure if that adds a lot of value. If you work in a finance industry, high-tech industry maybe, right, you can see you save a little bit more. Other industries, maybe it's because you lower pay or less education, you save a little bit less. So what's the point of showing this? Well, the point is, in most fire, you're trying to save to 25 times your annual expense. So what that means is, if you're spending 40,000 a year, 25 times that is hitting $1 million. Now that sounds crazy, and it really does, right, at first. But again, it's doable. But it's not doable by a large percentage of the population. And some of it is not because of the math don't work. It's a choice. Not everyone wants to save 50, 60, 70, 80% because some of us just enjoy driving around in new cars. Some of us enjoy spending a lot of money eating out. And so it's not about math and whether or not it's doable. This movement is not about high income earners. I do know that there's a lot of talk about, well, all the people who do it are people who are computer scientists or engineers or these people who make so much money. So fire can be done not just because you have a high income. Whether you have a medium level income, the key is increasing your savings rate. You cannot spend everything you make, right? It's the live below your means. And again, one measure is let's get your saving rate above 25. The higher you go above 25, the more you can save and the faster you build up your portfolio. And so again, that is not just available to high income earners. Now, proportionately, the more you make, some things cost less proportionate to your income. So like housing, if in your area, if it costs you $1,000 to live, it is true that if you make 100,000, that $1,000 rent, right, it's a smaller percentage of your income. But if you're only making $24,000 a year and your rent is $1,000, right, that's $12,000 a year, and your rent is eating up 60% of your salary. And so those are some factors. And again, but the teaching around fire is not just available to high income earners. When I first started out, I was making 28,000 or whatever it was, 26,000, and I lived in New York City, and I was able to save money. I wasn't able to save 60, 70, 80%, but I was able to save 10 or 15%. Then I moved to Boston, and I was still able to save 20, 30, 40%, whatever it was. I don't remember all the details. But I lived in an expensive city, and I was a low income wage earner. I did not make $100,000 when I lived in Boston. In fact, I think I was even making $32,000 was the year when I first moved to Boston. And I remember I was able to hit over 20% saving rate. Again, will I do this in 10 years? I didn't because I just didn't have enough income and I couldn't save over 50, 60, 70, 80%. But I was shooting for something different. I was shooting for coast, right? A little bit different. Now, I don't think they have coast fire back then, but I was shooting for something a little bit different. I came from the dividend investment um, background, and I wanted to just live off dividends using a passive income stream where you never touch the principal and everything outlives you. So that's a little bit different. I'm not going to cover that today, but this is what fire is. You can, let's not hate on fire movement. A lot of good articles. Again, I want you guys to go out there and read some of these websites. Financial Samurai is really good. I like the way he writes, and he actually went back to work and to make more money. He had kid. Choose wife, choose five is really good. And this one you may never heard of, Millennial Revolution. This is she wrote a book, Quit Like a Millionaire. Great read. It will open your eyes. She talks about living overseas and traveling. She retired early. But these are good things. Read about these things. Educate yourself. It may not be for you. You may do a different variation of this. But again, that's up to you. You can decide how you're spending your money. It's better than the other option of not knowing how, fitting in to the rest of the 90% of the population that trade their time, right, for work. You do it for 40 years, and if you have the average 401k balance, it is definitely not enough to retire with dignity. So I'd rather you think about this, come up with a different plan, or maybe something that's a mixture of all these other things that you can do, and figure out how you can retire. With that, I'm going to end this episode. We're going to cover a whole bunch more of other topics in the future. Again, they're just all random. They're not done in order. We're just going to talk about it and talk about some of the pros and cons and things to think about as you apply these things. Hopefully you learned something different about fire movement, and I will see you next time. Have a good day.